record. Está en el calendario. Thursday.
Okay. Persona uses images. Perfect. So, first thing to understand is that I'm going to repeat this a million times, is that everything is a file. So anything that you're working with, it's a script, Arduino code, images, programs, applications that we're going to do in the future, everything's a file. So is a website. The only thing is that website is a collection of files that we use to represent the content that we want to deliver. That content is structured in two main parts that are HTML, that gives us the skeleton, let's say the structure of our website, and some styling that we put on top in the form of CSS. Okay? Those two main content, those two main files are stored somewhere. Could be in our local machine or could be somewhere else in a server. For instance, from your computer perspective, google.com in San Francisco, imagine. And we connect to them with what we call HTTP or HTTP protocol, and we request something to that computer via network or the internet. In our case, locally, we're going to use whatever tool we want to develop those HTMLs and CSS files in our computer, and we're going to send them to a place in San Francisco as well that is called GitLab. GitLab is, let's say, a server that stores files, and that not only stores them, but also puts them available for everyone to see them in the form of a website. So GitLab stores the files, but also whenever someone asks, what is Neil's website, it's going to say, these are the files you want to see, I send them to you, your browser renders them. How do you make that connection between yourself, that are the people developing the HTML and CSS, to GitLab itself? With a tool that we call Git, and we send them over the process that I assume that you saw yesterday, that is this structure here, okay? So in blue here, you see that this is an abstraction of your laptop, let's say. Right? Actually, offline here, so everything from this line above is what we call, it would be offline, which is your laptop, okay? Here in blue is the files that you're working on. It's what you see on your text editor that you can modify and do let's say changes on, track the changes with local processes, staging, commit, etc. And to send them over to GitLab, you use this push, which is, I assume that you either saw something on the terminal or on Atom, and basically on the repo that you have, you do git push, and it sends it over to GitLab. How does it know that inside a folder, for instance, let me see, this is the Smart Citizen documentation, which is smartcitizen.me, which is this. Okay, this is the documentation of the project. How does my local folder here? Let me make this a little bit bigger. Let me just show you, for instance, this is a text file that talks about the Smart Citizen Kit. This is, for instance, the index Welcome to the Smart Citizen Project documentation. Welcome to the Smart Citizen Project documentation. Okay. How does this folder that I have in my computer know where to go into GitHub in this case? Because we define it locally. There's a file that stores this information and says, this is where you have to send the data to. Once that data is there, GitHub or GitLab, which are the servers, are going to do a little bit of process. And I'm going to make it available for everyone to see. So that whenever you go to docs.smartcitizen.id, it delivers this content. Okay? So basically, for you to, if I'm answering your question properly, I hope, is that in this area, in the offline part, you work on text files, let's say. You can use any tool that you want. I'll show you 2 or 3 tools to automatize a little bit this process today. And basically, you communicate from your local repository to the remote repository via push or pull, which is basically I push to the repo or pull from the repo. Okay. I don't know if you saw this yesterday, but there's other commands here. Pull is basically I take. Actually, I just want to make sure that this was yesterday explained. So I'm just going to invest a little bit of time in this. Git, what does is it doesn't track files completely, it tracks changes. What does it mean? That if I have a file that has, for instance, nothing, an empty file, and then I put some content in the file, the change is the new content. If I edit one line, Git is going to track that edition of that line, and that's it. That way we are able to trace code specifically so that we are able to understand what changes and how impacts in code development in a very smart way.
Yeah, that was another my question. Every time you do a pull or a push, you don't have to specify a file or a directory or anything. It will just push or pull their tasks wherever they are.
No, it's not as simple. It's not as simple. In the working area, let's say on the offline part, you have, let's say, the files that you see being edited. If you want to say, I want to prepare, let's say, milestone or what we call a commit, which is basically an item in the history of my project, I have to first take the files that I want and put them in what we call the staging area, which means I'm gonna stop editing the files and I'm gonna add them into a temporary state that signifies to me something like, yeah, an hito in Spanish, like a milestone or like an important point in the project that I want to put in the history as, I don't know, here I change the about page of my website, and you make changes of the about page. This is a temporary area that you add all the files that you want to mark as an important, let's say, change or milestone. Once you're ready, you make a commit. And that makes, let's say, this history line in the local repository. Your local repository can evolve forever, and you don't have to communicate with anywhere. Actually, Git could only work on the offline part, and it will be already a version control system. The fact that you can send it over to a remote repository means that you are able to synchronize with many places. In your case, you are only synchronized with one place. But for instance, when I develop the documentation of a Smart Citizen, I don't develop it myself only, but Victor, DM, another Victor, and other people also make contributions. So we are able to all sync with respect to the remote repository by taking our local repo and sending to the remote one, or pulling from the remote one to our local repository. So when we want to make when we want to send changes, let's say, we don't send them like I send everything and that's that. I change what I have first stage, which I add into the stage with this command called git add, and the files that I want. Git commit makes the commit. So this process here.
You have to do add and commit.
Yeah. Yeah, is the workflow is git add the files that you want, git commit the message of your commit, and then git push to send it over to the remote repo. Okay, let me show you. Yesterday I was working, for instance, in the Smart Citizen documentation. Okay, I'm just gonna show very quickly. Git status tells me the status of my working repository, my working directory versus the local, and says you've modified all of these things. Okay, there are these files that are modified, let's say, that already were being tracked and followed by Git. And then there were these other files that you added that appeared in this folder, but that they have never been tracked. I can add PNGs. In this case, you see that there are a lot of photos and things like this. Okay? So imagine that I want to say, I want to, this file here, I want to, let's say, commit that change. So I'm going to first git add and the file. And if I do git status again, okay. It didn't do anything. So now git status again. Now it's up here. It's ready to be committed. That's it. Actually, it's very verbose. In general Git, it says changes to be committed. This one. Change it, not staged. Understanding a stage, this part. This one. Changes or files that haven't been tracked. All of this. Okay? So let's say that I want to make a commit of this file because for me it means something. For Git doesn't care, but for me it means that I made some changes in Gas's reward file. Okay? So I say git commit -n to put a message. And here is where I really want to stress something out, that when you put something here, put something important, like that answers the question. If I apply this commit, da, 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 da. So in this case, I would say fixes wrong links in Gas's reward file. A lot of people you will see that do this. The message and they say, because they just want to get it over. Okay? But then, when you go into the repo, you see something like this. That's empty. Link, whatever. Okay. If I want to, Git not only keeps strength changes and a nice history, but it's also a tool to go back in history. And if I broke something, I can return to a safe state and understand what happened. So if I put these weird messages, I don't know what happened here. And if something broke, which actually did here, at that point something broke, how am I going to know what that ZX thing? I don't know. So here, this is the message that you put here. So git commit fixes wrong link on Gas's road. Okay. Now I can check the log, which is the history that you also see in GitLab, but you can see it on the terminal. And this is the latest commit. It has hash, let's say a unique identifier. And this is the name of what I called, let's say. And you see that here we are in a serious project. Let's say you are remote and you put add battery calculator and fix errors in Git power supply, fix logo censoring improve food, update smart citizen API, etc. Okay. Now, this is still everything local. You see that now the green part is gone, but now it says your branch, meaning your local repository, is ahead of the remote by one commit, meaning that you have one extra change locally that what you have on GitHub in this case. So what do I do to synchronize?
Sorry, one question. When you watch over log, it's the log on your computer,
Yes.
it's not the log online.
Well, it's synchronized, and actually, Git log, you see here it says head. Head is where we're pointing at, let's say on the history locally.
Okay.
Master is the let's say the main branch. We'll talk about branches later. And origin is the remote. Okay, actually when I did before git remote show origin, origin is a convention, or you can call this however you want it, but origin is fablabcn.smartcitizen.ingithub.com.
Okay. So why it says the origin was your computer?
When it says origin, this is where actually the remote is at this moment.
Okay.
So I also have some information of the status of the remote.
Okay.
If, for instance, someone else did something different in the remote, I will see it here.
Okay.
Yeah. So you see that now I'm pointing at the latest commit, and that I want to synchronize that. So I just say git push, and it will say sending one commit, enumerating objects, writing, blah blah blah, to github.com. And if I now go into the documentation, you see fixes ground links on graphics program. Now it's synchronized. Okay, and you see all the commits here. Blah, 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 the same as I had on my local version, but in a web base. Okay, but there are different repositories, and the same you will do with your website. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, in our case, basically, it's going to be just us, keeping the version control of our website. If I modify, the index file and modify the final project file, multiple files, can I do that and commit? It has to be per each file, or we can do like a general.
You can stage as many files as you want at once. So you might imagine that I wanted to do all of them. So sorry, I probably use a lot of shortcuts. GST for me is an alias for git status, so that I don't have to type git status every time. But here I could add all of them if I wanted. I'm not going to show you how to do it because then you get bad practices. You do it yourself if you want. But you can add all of them, commit all of them if you wanted, and then send them at the same time. One thing that I don't recommend you is that further you add everything because unless that you work in a very methodic way, you normally tend to change many things at the same time that conceptually signify different things. For instance, you work on the about page, you work on the final project page. Probably you want to group them conceptually. I don't know. And the other thing is that you see here that it says writing objects 100%, 661 bytes. Every time that you push or send something, if you send something over 10 megabytes, more or less, it's going to say no and rejects it. So if you make one commit that contains, for instance, 10 files, each of those files are images, and they weigh 2 megabytes, each of them, 20 megabytes in total. GitLab is going to say, I don't accept that, it's too much. So you're going to have to split that up. And I recommend that you split that and don't send these paths, let's say, or he calls it, in general, the packs that are smaller than 10 megabytes. If you do that, we won't see each other that much time troubleshooting your Git repo. Because, for instance, with MDev happens a lot that we have to split commits of 300 megabytes because they put a video, 600 images that are super high quality, and they do add everything, commit, push. Over. Super easy trigger for typing git add, git commit, git push. And then all of a sudden, GitLab is complaining, the repo is not synchronized, boom, 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 and then we have to start and do a lot of debugging. And when you do a commit, it's not easy to revert the status, and especially with this file. So yes, you can add several files, but be careful, don't add too many files. Text files are fine, but files that have images or video are not as fine. And you will see that this will happen because you have to upload your files for your designs and stuff like this.
I was more worried about having difference between the local repository and GitLab, but I guess you can check with the status and it will tell you what's
exactly. And in general, if you at the end of the day, what you have to do with your repo is have the website up ready. So if you want to have local development for, let's say, 3 or 5 days, like I'm doing here, I have a lot of these files that I'm going to work for 2 or 3 days until I have something ready, and then I'm going to start pushing. But it doesn't matter. I mean, locally, they are here, they're safe. You don't have to back them up all the time. Unless, I don't know, you're working on a super important feature and you are worried that your laptop is going to break down. But in general, it's not necessary. It's not the case.
I have a question. I'm actually a little bit concerned about the limit of the size of the repository because, like, I understand that when we are creating our website, we'll be maybe linking videos with email, YouTube, or other platforms. But if we are using the repo as kind of like an archive, like the original media, even though it's compressed, it will be still weighing a lot. So it should be on the repo, or should we be keeping the media elsewhere instead of like the
media, define media?
Like video recordings from my cell phone from different tests, like using electronics, for example.
You can put that in YouTube or Vimeo in a private account if you want. Photos for web size, it's fine. Normally, websites, the image input shouldn't weigh more than 600, 500 kilobytes. So, I mean, considering that you have around 14 weeks times, I don't know, 20 images a week times 600 kilobytes divided by 1,000. That is still acceptable. It's 170 megabytes. The repo size tops should be 300 megabytes more or less at the end. So considering the images is going to be the biggest chunk. And then the files, your design files and things like this are mostly text-based files because it's code, except on next week that are design files for 3D. Yeah. And in that case, we recommend that either you send them, depends on the type, but either you put them on a Sketchfab, which is a repository in which you can upload 3D files and then people can download them, and even they have a nice web visualizer that you can see them on the website. Or really compress them in a zip file and try to put them online. And at the end, the 300 megabytes is a soft limit. There's not, we don't have a script saying if this repo is over 300 megabytes, stop rejecting it. So you should be, in general, you should be okay.
No, I mean, I understand like on the long run, but for example, I know that I create like a lot of recordings that maybe when you later on need to edit the video, you need the original file, the one that weighs like a couple of megabytes, not the compressed version. So all of that should be in another backup, right?
You can keep that locally. The only thing that we need on the repo itself is, let's say, the process file that answers, let's say, or the purpose of the repository is R2. First, if someone else in, I don't know, Kuala Lumpur wants to replicate your project, they should be able to do it because it's proposed now so that they are able to do it. Second is yourself, in 2 years from now, if you read your repo and you forgot about everything, are you able to replicate it or not? That's the thing.
Okay.
So, I mean, raw files are not necessary for the repository.
Thank you.
And one more question about videos. Yesterday we saw how to include YouTube video, for example, but if we store everything on Dropbox and a video, Dropbox is not to visualize video. So if we make the link to a Dropbox video, the browser has something to read it, you will understand what we want to do.
I've never done that. I'm sure we could do it, but we don't consider in general Dropbox, let's say, permanent storage area. Things like Google Drive, Dropbox, let's say user-dependent drives, like Microsoft OneDrive, and these things are not good options, let's say, because that's up to you that you can read it on even your local version. So we recommend to have them on YouTube. That is a little bit more difficult. Or YouTube, Vimeo, any other video platform.
And another question, when you show the full action, I understand from the diagram that you download the latest version that is on the repository.
Yeah.
But what I knew or understood from the tool is that you get all the history that is available on the repository, and then you can choose which version you want to work with. So
not fully. So you see that there are three ways to download content from online. The first one is clone, which you don't have anything. I'm gonna go around here and then I will come back to it.
Okay.
So clone is basically, there's a repo online that I don't have any connection to. I download it and I get it as a Git repo on my local version. That starts a new repository locally. Okay.
That's what we did yesterday.
Yeah, exactly. Then fetch and pull are ways to synchronize an existing remote onto your offline or your local area, let's say, but in two different ways. And this is important. Fetch takes remote repository and synchronizes it with the local repository, which is basically both histories, online and offline. I don't like offline, let's say local and remote are synchronized. So basically, fetch brings them both up to date, taking whatever also is online first, or taking whatever is online and synchronize it to the local one. And then pull does the latest version of the repository, synchronizes with the local repo, and then merges with the working directory. It means that it shows the latest version into your working file. So you see, for instance, if you were working in a Smart Citizen and Victor made some change and you pull, you will see what Victor just edited. You will see it on the whatever editor you use, and your local repo will be synchronized. If you wanted to synchronize to a specific commit, either you synchronize everything and then you do git checkout, with basically checks out on a specific item, and this is where this number comes into play, because if it's the one that is the one that I would use here to go back to that state.
Okay.
Or when you pull, you do git pull, and then I think something like origin master and the hash.
Okay.
But it's a little bit more complex. I've never done it. You could simply take everything and then locally go to whatever state you want.
Okay.
Okay.
If you want to start on a big project that has a lot of history, and maybe you have nothing on your computer and you just want to take, let's say, the latest version on your computer, what would you do?
You would do git clone. You take the repo and you have the latest version, but you will also have the git history. There's no way that you can synchronize a repo with just one. There could be a way, But remember that Git tracks changes. So the latest version of the repo is not, well, yes, you could do it if you just downloaded the, let's say, the working files online. So if you go to here, you say code download zip, but there's no Git history there. You can initialize it, and that's it. And there's no other way to do it with Git itself, because basically you're just taking the last version. Sorry, you're taking the whole history, and the last version is just the changes with respect to the previous last version. So there's no way that that is going to be a valid working file, because it's just a bunch of changes.
The way it's saved really, it is like accumulation of change, or text time the number of history version. Like you don't have 100 times the weight of the website on your computer.
So this is how it's saved. More or less, this is a visual representation, but basically Git says in this commit has that is a file, let's say number. We deleted line number 22. We added line 25. So we just say minus 22 plus 25 and plus 4, 5, 6. And we added this one. The rest doesn't change. That's it. That's everything that
It does not wait in the last comment.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's start talking about the topic for today then. So yesterday you saw how to build websites, let's say manually, I would assume. Like you write HTML, you probably download a template, you use some bootstrap templates that you download somewhere and you start editing them. You make a repo and then you synchronize that with GitLab, GitHub stuff. Everything that you're building, what we're going to see today is static site generators. And I want just to make clear what static means in a static site generator. So a static website versus a dynamic website is basically this schema here, in which your website is stored somewhere, you download it, and that's it. Dynamic site is that you, as a user, you make a request to a server. That server does something, probably checks the database, probably does a little bit of processing, I don't know what, maybe calculates your user feed for Facebook, gets some ads from Google, etc., 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 and brings that back to you. So it means that when you request a website, a static website, you just send a request and you download it. That's it. It takes very little time. But when you do a dynamic website, you make the request, something happens, and then it comes back and it gives you the dynamic version, like the website that you requested. Why do we want a static and dynamic website? Static website is that the content is the same for everyone. Like if I go to the Fab Academy documentation, you and Neil and everyone sees the same thing. No one sees anything different. But if Adrian or Neil or Diego go to their Facebook profiles, if you have any, I don't know, each of you see a different thing, right? Not only because you have your own profile, but also because Facebook or any social network calculates your feed specific to, I don't know, your political inclinations, religious stuff, ads, online behavior, etc. And they have a server running somewhere doing all this process. We will see dynamic websites probably at the end of the year in the code club. It's not part of the term of the what we do in Fab Academy. We will see a couple of frameworks to build that with Python. But what we're going to focus on is static sites, okay? Which is the purpose of what you need to do for your documentation. And today the idea is that we're going to see ways to generate sites, static sites, in a, let's say, automatic way. automatic way, let's say, through SSGs or static site generators. Main thing, I think that, well, I think you're already familiar with this, and you saw this yesterday, but basically every website in the HTML, you have two main parts, head and body. Head basically brings all attachments and necessary content to render files, to add scripts, to download Google Fonts, etc., links and things like this. Also, for instance, if you have robots or things like this for Google, etc., etc., and the body is, let's say, the structure of the website, right? Is where everything goes related to the divs, the tables, the numbers, the images, and all this. What we're going to do with a static site generator is use a simple to use language, let's say, something that is not full of tags like use, image, href, etc., etc. We're going to remove all that. We're just going to focus on the content. And then we're going to take a small script that takes a template, that content, and puts all together and generates the HTML and the CSS and all that for us. Why is this interesting? Well, because it will save us a lot of time. It's a little bit longer at the beginning because you have to find and customize a little bit the way that you want that process to happen. But in the long term, it makes websites specifically that have a very similar structure in a recursive way. In this case, it's very clear that each of the weeks probably will be more or less the same for you, but you just change a little bit of content, but they have the same structure, each of them. It will make all that process very easy, okay? An example for that is this. Actually, I'm going to show you not the docs for Smart Citizen, but I'm going to show you the content of today's lesson. Okay, so this is what I write when I want to generate this page. Okay, this is one of them, one of the examples that we're going to see that is called mkdocs. Okay, which is a static site generator written in Python that basically puts together or does this all this process, and you will start identifying it because they all more or less look the same. If you look at this or this, they have very similar, let's say, aesthetics, and this is normally used for software documentation, and let's say it's very common in open source. So,
can you tell me the Wi-Fi password, please? Sorry for you.
Wi-Fi password?
Yeah.
Enter IR 2015. And the Wi-Fi is IR Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, IR. Wait, that's the Wi-Fi and enter IR 2015. No problem. So, this is what I would write when I want to generate the content for that website, which, as you see, has some items of what we call markup. I'll explain that in a second. That are just simply signifiers of that something is happening there. But you see that the content is pretty much almost empty. It's like as if you were writing it on a document, a Microsoft Word document, or other things. Basically, this structure, we will see what all these things mean in a second. This structure is what is replicated then or passed through the template by the static site generator and generates the HTML file. For you to see, let me see if I can, it's not here. But for us to see the difference, if you're writing in HTML directly, this is all the stuff that happens, let's say. Probably that's too small. So this is all the stuff that actually is rendered, let's say, and this is what we're writing on the right. So you see that the language that we write on the right is much simpler than what we write on the left, and that's the whole purpose of this. What we are doing here is using something called markup languages. HTML is one markup language. Basically, we have language, text, and we put on top of it certain tags or certain items that mean something, and that the browser, in this case, can render. These links, lists, tables, etc. And we normally put them like this, with this quote, like, I don't know how you say that, I think like quote in English. Opening something, closing something with the slash, and the same for all the other items. Those items mean something, and that is marked, like marking up the language. As a word game, let's say, Markdown is a very simple markup language, which basically makes our life easier to write down content that can be later on sent over to HTML or other things. This one here is something that you can use to practice and also to write down some of your notes. It's called HackMD. And it's basically a website in which you can write on the left side on Markdown, and on the right side it will run. Okay. There one, there two. Okay. So on the left I'm writing in what we call Markdown. On the right is being rendered on HTML. I can hide this, share it with someone else, and I look like a pro. And it's very simple, and we use it all the time here and in other projects to just take notes and write down development stuff and then put it in the documentation. HackMD, you just need, if you have a GitHub account, you can log in into here. And I'm going to use it now to show you the main items that you can use for putting things in the in Marks. Okay. So first of all is this hashtag thing. I think you can also call this found, which basically means header or heading. 1 means header 1, 2 means header 2, 3 means header 3, so on and so forth. And you see that sequentially they go smaller and smaller. This plain text, let's say, or paragraph P, is just written as it is. There's no need to tag anything. And that is going to be the content of your site is here. Okay. Everything that you're going to write is here. Let's put something larger. Have some content here. Okay. Basically, I just write everything. There it is. Let's just start doing something a little bit more interesting. If I want, for instance, to put an image.
So you are generating a HTML file
Mhm.
in the right. This is a HTML website.
For now, no. For now, I'm just showcasing the use of Markdown, and I'll show you how to generate that HTML website afterwards.
Oh,
Okay. This is, let's say, an online tool that you can use to just write things down or make notes for yourself. That has this nice interface. I mean, I like it because it's quite clean, but it's not what we are going to use in general for the class. This is just like to show you Markdown. So header 1, header 2, header 3, paragraph. If I want to put an image, I do exclamation mark, open, close brackets. And then inside the parentheses, I put the link for an image. Let's say an image from here, copy image citation. That's the link. There you go. Already have the image there. If the image is not found, you can put the alternative text in here. So image hub MD. I imagine that this is not found, so this is the alternative text. Okay. Quite easy to put images already. If you want to put a link, you enclose whatever that link is gonna be written into brackets, and then afterwards, with the same structure as an image, you put that, and you have it here already. So if I click in here, that already points to the same URL. And that's almost it. I mean, at the end of the day, if you think of the content of your website, it's going to be some images, some links, and a row of text. So you see that writing this in here doesn't take any time. And then now we're going to see how to make that look as a website with the different tools that you do have out there. Okay. Do you have any questions? Okay. I close things up. So, first one I'm going to show is Playbox. On your GitLab, FabCloud, repos, I think that you already have one Playbox if you want to use it. Anyone? Let's see. I don't know. I'm going to just take this one. Okay, not this one. Does anyone that hasn't touched anything yet?
So I upload a folder, but I don't know if it's
Okay. A completely empty repo that someone hasn't touched yet. You have touched stuff?
I just downloaded it.
You download it. Here. Okay. So this guy called Julian Gallimore, nice name, is a guy in Italy that is basically the system admin for GitLab FabCloud. It's nice to know who he is. He basically put an online template, let's say, for you, and you see here Playbox. Okay. You can, if you go to your own profile, I think yours is coming. I think it's not here yet. Yeah, it will come anyway. I will tell them today. You can go into clone, copy URL, and just git clone and that one. I'm just gonna clone the template. Don't worry, I won't modify anything. This template.
Just one question, Óscar. The difference between using the SSH or HTTP is to avoid password or something like this, or there is.
Okay. Did you do this yesterday? Did you talk about SSH?
We directly did the SSH.
Okay. Basically, SSH is the, let's say, standard way to communicate with servers remotely through what we call secure cell SSH. For this, you need to put a key in the server, and that will identify you against the server anytime that you download something. It's more secure than HTTPS in general because it's further down in the OSI model of the networking IP address and all these things. HTTPS, if you don't have any SSH key on the server, you are allowed to download it because this is open source in principle, so you can just get it through HTTP, and you don't need to be identified against the server. So basically, SSH in general is I'm identified against the server, and it's a very secure way of interacting with it. HTTP is just the same as you would download any other file from online. It's encrypted, as in the S signifies, but it's not, let's say, the most secure transaction. Okay. So here, if I do, well, if you see anything that I type in the terminal or something, I have a lot of shortcuts. Sub is basically open with Sublime, and dot is open the current directory. So if I do this, basically opens the file, all the files that I have in Sublime. If this is confusing or something, don't worry, it will come. I also have like my own things that you will have in the future. Here, these are the docs. Oops. That well, this is the, let's say, main part of the template, and in here you have the doc folder. Probably that's big enough, right? And if you see here, week 1, you already have some text put by this guy with some examples. How to put an iframe, how to put a video, how to put the images in the same way as I showed you, how to put code. This is how you put code. Let me show you in here. Imagine that you want to paste your Arduino code. You put this 3 reverse tilde, the accent, open and close it, and then you have this nice looking render. In HackMD, only in this website, if you put CPP or something like that. What's this? No, I don't know. It depends on your template as well. This will render nicely with colors or things like this. By default, it doesn't. And here, Julian has prepared some other examples. You see links the same way we saw headers and stuff. And you already have a file. MD stands for Markdown. Markdown file for each of the weeks. An about page that you just say, hey, whatever, final project page, etc., etc. Oh, this is how you make a table as well, with this vertical bars, it's called, etc., etc. And let's go into the next stuff. So imagine that I have this site, okay? This is the docs file containing all the Markdown stuff. I'm going to close it. I will explain givignore and gitlab CI later. mkdocs.ynl is basically the input file for mkdocs, defining where all the stuff is, okay, what the things are that I want to do. This is some metadata, let's say, that describes how the website is called, the description that would appear in Google, for instance, your name, the URL. You don't have to test that, some extra stuff. If you don't want any of this, you can just put a comment. and it won't render it. If you don't want to have, I don't know, Instagram link there. This is where the theme, let's say how it looks, it's scripts, some plugins, and some extensions. Don't worry about this, we'll go into it in a second. This is forget that command, but now I'm going to say mkdocs serve. And plugins don't have that, so I'm just going to delete it. Building documentation. Okay. Now it's serving. This is your local host. So this is your computer, the IP of your computer, and this is the port. So if I go here, I see it. And I didn't have to do anything else than write some Markdown here. You already have this template actually ready, so you could clone it and start working on this one if you like it. And just do mkdocs serve. Okay. Of course, this means that I already have mkdocs installed and everything, so I will explain that in a second. What I want you to see is that this started this server, that I can edit the stuff here, for instance, in the index page. Hello, my name is Óscar, and we are looking into SSGs. I save. Something happens. There's a watcher detecting changes. Reload, blah, blah, blah. If I go here, it's already there. And I can work very easily. If you are a geek like me, you can even do some window tidying and start doing this stuff. And it almost looks like I am in Hacking. Hello again. Hello again. Takes a little bit, just Python reloading stuff, but you could work like this already. Let's say you don't like text editor. Sorry? You just open the files in the text editor? Exactly. The text editor that I use is Sublime Text. There's other editors like Atom. I don't like Sublime, I don't like Atom, I don't like many of them. I just use whatever I'm used to, but they are not good, as in very good as for productivity. Atom is normally liked by a lot of people. VS Code is also easy for people to get started with. VS Code is Microsoft one. If you don't want Microsoft to track you, you could use VS Code, which is basically the same for us VS Code, but a lot of people have taken all the scripts that Microsoft puts into VS Code to track your behavior and what you do as a code developer to offer stuff later, and taking all of that and put them like this. So VS Code, if you want to use it, is nice. And if you're a hardcore developer, you probably already know much better than I do Vim, which is a text editor on the terminal. It doesn't have to do anything with drills or things like this, but basically is Vim or vmkdocs.yml. So I'm editing the file on the terminal. This probably is a little bit hardcore at the beginning, but developers, high-end developers not like me, work this way. Up to you. The commands are a little bit complicated to get around at the beginning. But you see, if you ever end up in V or Vim and you don't know how to get out, column, Q, and you're out. Okay. If you end up there and you don't know how to exit, column, Q, and you're out. There's another one called nano. if you work with Raspberry Pi or these things, normally it's a nice editor to edit things or in a Raspberry Pi in the terminal. There you have it. If you end up in Nano and you don't know how to get out, you have a nice help here. This little hat, circumflex, means control. So Control X and you're out. Not if you use a Mac like me, it's not command, it's control. There's the two keys. So control is two keys to the left of command. Control X and you're out. And that's that. So yeah, normally I use Sublime, but it's also nice because in the classes I can zoom in and things like this. But it's up to you which one you want to use. Coming back here, let's say that I want to change the theme and I want to go into, let's see if this works, blue. Reload it, this change, whatever. And I have now.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
Like in your terminal, at some point, you were calling the local server.
Yeah.
But I missed where you where you were doing it. By doing both the server.
When I finish it, I start over again. So mkdocs serve, and I start building the documentation, and basically just keeps the server active and keeps it open for me, and tells me the address here, serving on localhost 8,000. If you wanted to change that, you could do task A, and then, for instance, local host on the port 9999. It changes to that one. So you connect. This one is no longer active, and this one is. And now this part changed. It's black. I just put black in there. That's it. The accent now is blue. Before I put it in blue. Easy peasy. If you don't want to bother building a outrageously weird website, this can be it. Okay.
And then the other question was like, is it possible? Like, I see that the Markdown is super straightforward and very easy to create a documentation on the go. But is it possible to create a landing page that's done with the HTML and like it's more complex, and then have the rest of the pages with Markdown?
Yes. Yeah, you can do that. Basically, each of the websites that you create in, let's say, in Power Academy, don't need to have specifically this structure, but at least there has to be one index .html that is what you visit in general, right? That can be anything, and from that you can regenerate or link to a Markdown documentation if you want. Is this the easiest way to do it? I don't know if I would recommend it with mkdocs, but we could do it with another one that I'm going to show you in a second, that is called Objective, which is a little bit easier. If you want to do it, you could modify a little bit the process in which the website builds and have indexed HTML created by yourself and the rest by mkdocs. It's possible, but it's not the default way that mkdocs works. So we have to look a little bit into it. I'm going to give you the way that I would do it, and you decide. Okay.
Yes.
Now, so you see, mkdocs is pretty simple. This is the way you can open the wix, modify them, etc. I'm not going to go deeper into this because it's like very straightforward, but I recommend you to do two things if you want to start using mkdocs. Is that you go to Barcelona, to this link, actually, GitLab.com/PCM projects. well, actually, that you go to the local documentation and just click on there, and that will redirect to where the repo is. And here you can see mkdocs.yml and some extra stuff that you might want to just copy and see if you like it. The same for the Smart Citizen documentation.
So how did you go to that?
To the local, so if you go to the local documentation, yeah, on the top right, here,
Okay.
there's this button. The same for the Smart Citizen docs. If you go here, you end up in the GitHub. And here you can get some inspiration on how to do this in a, let's say, more advanced way. This, for instance,
Sorry, it's the code of the page or scene.
yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. And not only, but also the YAML file, this mkdocs.yaml, that shows a little bit the configuration for mkdocs. If you want to show, for instance, a different logo, a different color, you want to use things, for instance, like mathematics. If you write formulas, that you can write them and they look nice, extra things. You have some examples here that you can take and get inspiration from. Of course, the documentation as well, material. This is the template. And reference. I'm going to put this in the chat. This is the documentation for mkdocs material theme, which is the one that almost everyone uses. And here you can see how you can do nicer things like, I don't know, these little tabs or footnotes. If you wanted to add a footnote, if you were writing references, things like this, you can have a look into it. It's quite extensive. There's a lot of people working into it because it's super popular. And as you see, they also use, of course, mkdocs in their documentation. You will start seeing this bar appear like very everywhere now, because it's what normally a lot of people use. So for you to be able to use mkdocs, you need to have Python installed on your computer. You can get Python from, if you go to guides of the local documentation, no, sorry, clubs, code club Python 101. You can install, go to install in Python, and you have some information here on how to set it up. Here, there's this guide for Mac OS, Windows, or Linux. I recommend that you don't ever go to use Python 2 unless you really need to, because it's not longer supported. Python 3 is the new one. So if you want to use mkdocs, Python 3, install it from here. The guide is in here, Code Club Python 101, installing Python. Okay, and there's the link to go to Python. And then once you have that, you will have something called pip. Pip is Python package installer that basically takes packages from a lot of different repos, and you can install different things, and then pip install mkdocs. Quite obvious what it does. You press enter and installs mkdocs, and then you can do mkdocs serve or mkdocs build, and it will show.
Can I check in the terminal if I have Python or mkdocs?
Come again?
How can I check if I have it installed in the terminal?
If you already have Python, if you want to check Python, if you just type Python, this should open. If it opens and you don't know how to get out of there, Control D. if you just type Python, should go in. The same for mkdocs. If you type mkdocs, at least should give you an output and tell you, hey, you need to give me more information on what you want to do. And the same for pip. We will, in a week, or next Monday, we will talk about how to install Python, let's say, well, we will talk in the code lab of how to do it. So if you are a little bit overwhelmed and you've never used Python, we will look into that. Nevertheless, I'll encourage you to have a look at it using the guide. In principle, it should be somehow streamlined process for all of the computers that you're using, which I assume are Windows, Linux, or Mac. Linux, probably nothing more complex than Ubuntu, some of you. So in principle, you should be all covered. Any specifics on how to install it, if you want, we can look at it after today or tomorrow morning. There's no problem. But basically, once you have Python, you have pip. You can pip install mkdocs and then mkdocs set. Okay. Actually, since these commands are not in the documentation, I'm just going to add them now, and you will see the whole process.
Óscar, one question.
Yeah.
We don't send the HTML to the repository, we send the .md files. Or we generate HTML that then we send to the repository.
So this is where I'm going to confuse you a lot. Let me add this and I'll show you.
Okay.
Talk on the repo. Okay, I'm just as if I was generating this mkdocs, and you need to have Python installed. You can follow this guide, and the guide is this one. I'm just putting everything on the same spot to install it. Version, do not use Python 2. It's no longer supported. Once you have it, you can do the following. So pip install mkdocs. And after deploying the repo, pip from your repo kit cd your repo and mkdocs set. Okay, you see how fast that is actually, and if I go already into this and I do mkdocs search, I can check how this looks. Sorry, I'm closing this in terminals because there are so many open. You see, we have a lot of warnings and problems. One day we will fix them. Here it is. So weekly classes, static site generators, mkdocs. I basically added these instructions, and this danger thing that I put in here is basically this little banner that should look a little nicer. Let's see. There we go, like that. So you can just simply in Markdown as well make these little banners with like this, exclamation, 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 danger, the title of the banner in quotes, and then indented the message that you want to put. So that's that. There you have it. And here are the rest of the instructions. Okay. Follow this guide, it goes to the guide, hit install, clone your repo, go into the folder of your repo, mkdoc-serve, and you have the template up and running. Okay. Now, answering to your question, normally, what we do is we stop the server. Now, let's say I do git status. This is the file I changed. So git.docs, material, adding, git commit, add mkdocs, instructions on SSG page, git push. And you see that I added the Markdown file, and I just send it over to GitLab, right? What happens now? Okay. What happens? Git commit. Okay. Git push. No. Okay. So what happens? If you look in your repo, let's take the repo from here was an example. There is one file called gitlab.ci.yml. What does that mean? Actually, it's .gitlab.ci.yml. You don't see that if you open it in Finder or your browser, let's say. But actually exists. It's, let's say, somehow a hidden file. It's not hidden, but it's there. And what it does is that it tells the server, in this case GitLab, that it has to do something when you receive the files. In this case, the files are Markdown files. And you see here that it says mkdocs build site. So it's basically the same as we are doing locally by changing the instruction, calling build, and putting it into, this is, let's say, a test. Let's forget about this for a second. mkdocs build, and the name of the folder in which we're going to build it is called public. If I do that locally, let me go to Diego. mkdocs build site dir public. So this is an instruction that is going to be run in GitLab. You see it took 1.47 seconds, and I have this folder called public. If I open that folder in public, there's now all the HTML generated. Okay. That actually I could visit here this HTML in my computer, and it's exactly the same as it's going to be rendered in the computer and the same as I was testing before. Okay, it's just this is the static site generator doing its thing. We took the Markdown file, we built it, and we made the HTML. What we're saying here is that indeed GitLab CI YAML, CI stands for continuous integration, is that whenever you receive the files, you're going to run that mkdoc build, blah, 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 and put it in a public folder. After that, you're going to take that public folder and you're going to deploy it. meaning you're going to put it accessible for someone to see. Whenever someone visits your URL, the one that you have, let's say, ascribed to your username, they're going to be delivered that way, that public folder. Okay? I'm debating internally right now on what to tell you, but basically, this means that every time you send something, the server has to run it. It will run mkdocs still, and probably the server at some point, if all of you do it at the same time, on Tuesday before the end of the week, the server at some point will be a little bit collapsed and will be like, I don't like this. And your deployment stage, you will see it will take a long time. Maybe at the beginning it takes 5 seconds or 1.5 seconds. Maybe in the future, at the end of the Fall Academy, it will take 15 minutes. And in the final project days, you won't like that stress. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up for that. And encourage you, and this is an optional thing, to not publish the Markdown files, but publish the build file locally, this folder only, and tell GitLab to not build it itself, but to just deploy the public folder. So instead of sending the docs as in Markdown, we can send the docs as in Markdown as well, but we will build them locally in each of your computers, and then GitLab will take care of just deploying that and won't have to do any pipeline stuff in GitLab. We will do it in our computer, and then GitLab will take care of just taking the public folder and putting it available. That first is much faster, better for everyone, better for the server, and also better even if you consider it for environment. It's a little bit far-fetched, but you're not doing an operation here and then doing it somewhere else again. You just do it once because you have to do it here in the computer. You look that everything works fine. If it works here, it would work here. And the thing that you send, and the fact that you do it in here already, doesn't mean that you have to do it in GitLab again. You just do the operation here, send the result, and GitLab publishes it. You don't do it here and then do it again there and publish it. Right? So if you wanted to do that, you would have to change the GitLab.ci file. And there are templates for doing so. And basically, if you go into your docs, I'm not going to add it. I'm just going to showcase how it works. But if you wanted, if Diego wanted to do as I say, he would go into his main folder, click on the plus button on top, and say new file. Here it would say select a template type, GitLab CI.yml, and apply a template called HTML. That's your file. And if you look at what it does, the script basically makes a directory called .public, copies everything that is on the folder, on your folder from, so in your repository to that folder, and then renames it as file, removing the publish file. So when you push, you just copy everything to a folder that is not public, and that's what you do, which is pretty simple. And that way we will avoid having to run a lot of things on GitLab itself and save some CO2 and some time.
If we are working directly in HTML, we will do the same process.
You use exactly this template.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to use something to the template, or we save it as it is?
So this is the file on the GitLab, and this is only in case that you wanted to deploy HTML-based sites that you build locally with mkdocs or with any other SSG. If you didn't want to do that, you could do mk Python that's too complex. You just use the template that you have available on the repo, which is here, which gives all the instructions to the server to do it. But that template is just, it's not a web template or anything, it's just the template of the instructions to the server. And those instructions could differ depending on the SSG that you use. Either mkdocs, Jekyll, that we will see in a second, or building locally by just pushing HTML directly. Which actually, if you use mkdocs, just to keep it simple, mkdocs, building locally, or HTML directly is exactly the same file. You just have to push the public folder and that's it. If you wanted GitLab to do that job for you, then you keep the file that Julian left in the repo for you. Yeah.
So if we work in HTML directly, we can delete all the artifacts we have here.
Yeah. Yeah. And just start. So you clone it first.
Yeah.
You delete everything.
We create this file and then we can push.
Okay. And actually, what I would recommend you is that you push without creating the GitLab's whys, blah, blah, blah. You push the HTML and everything, and then later on, in GitLab, you do this. This way. And then you push. And you take that file to GitLab. That way, you don't risk making a mistake copying that file. Okay. Yeah. So, to summarize, you can build your website locally with HTML or anything. You publish it, you send it to GitLab. And with this GitLab CI/YAML, the server just does a tiny operation, which is renaming the content and publishing it. If you want to use a static site generator, you have two options. You can use the static site generator locally, build locally, and push the content rendered already in HTML to the server, and you will do the same as the basic HTML. Or you could rely on GitLab using what Julian prepared to do the rendering process in GitLab, which for me, in my point of view, is unnecessary. I encourage you to, I know that is a lot of information and everything, you can do this in the future maybe, but I encourage you to follow either one of the two first options, because it will save some time, it will make processes more efficient, and some CO2 for the plant. Okay. Yeah? So,
if we have CSS files also,
yeah.
the HTML it will work properly, or we will need another.
So you would have to send them over to everything to GitLab. And if you look in here, this is the public folder of the site that we just built. In head, let's see where it is. You have here style sheets that are linked in the HTML, and at the end they have to be seen. And if we go here, assets, style sheets, application palette, these two are here. These are automatically generated. That's why they have those weird names and they look like this. But normally you can either write them yourself and in a nice way, or you could even put them in the same HTML at the end. Adding something like after HTML, you could say style and start writing here. Yeah. So that's that for mkdocs. Two parts. You have to install Python, then install mkdocs, then clone the repo, edit it, and then do as you want for the deployment phase, let's say. Since we have till 12, I'm going to stretch with the last one, and then we take a break. I'm going to show you another very popular framework for editing static site generators called Jekyll. Jekyll is a little bit different. Let me close them down first. And let me stop. Let me go back to the class. So Jekyll is the same as mkdocs, but is written in something different. Well, in another language called Ruby. You might have heard of it. It's let's say Python, C++, Ruby, Rust are, let's say, coding languages, and Jekyll is one static site generator like written on Ruby. So the same way we needed to have Python installed in our laptop to use mkdocs, we need to have Ruby in our laptop to use it. As simple as that. How to install it? You have information here. macOS, Ubuntu, other Linux distros, or Windows. Follow the steps on the guide carefully, and really pay attention to each of them in a methodic way, so that everything works. Because if you miss some of the steps, then something might get broken and not work. Once you're done with that, if you go to your terminal and say Ruby-V, it should tell you the Ruby version that you have. In my case, I have 2.7.1. Ruby, the same way pip has, Python has pip to install packages. Ruby has something called gems. You can get the analogy. Like Ruby gems, amongst the Rubies. Coders actually. So the packages are installed with gem, and they have a very similar syntax to pip. Instead of pip, you put gem and then the name of the gem. Two important gems you have to install: bundler and Jekyll. Once you have them, you are able to do Jekyll new and the name of the site that you want to create, in this case Fab Academy. And then you should be able to go into that folder. I did this yesterday. So I did Jekyll new test site. It created the process and now test site. Okay. So here, if I open it, I have a bunch of stuff. Same way as I had before with mkdocs. Config is the configuration file for Jekyll. You see that it also is YML, very similar to mkdocs. Before it was mkdocs.yml, now it's _config.yml. Here you have the same structure, let's say, title, the theme, instead of material, this is called minima, and some extra things. Here in the gem file, this is basically, if you are familiar with Python requirements.txt, which is the packages that you have to install for a Python project, let's say. The gem file is the same, just packages that do several things, where to download them, and what file, what version they are. Here is automatically generated.
Yeah, one question. Those package, if we use this on the server that does not those package,
it will download them from the source.
But maybe the server doesn't want to download all the package you want, or
yeah, well, normally in the server, for instance, when you go to here, there is either this button here, that is the let's say, the process that was run by the server. You can go here and go here. And basically, you have the terminal output of the server, and it will tell you. Okay, if it doesn't work, you have to go through here, and that's how it works. Every time that you put something, it launches and what we call an instance. It's a virtual machine in GitLab.com or wherever else that is fully empty and fully totally stupid. Let's say it doesn't have absolutely anything except Linux. So it does all the stuff like pip install mkdocs. It doesn't remember. It installs everything from the get fresh start every time. So you see that why isn't it interesting to build it locally as well? Because you don't have to repeat all this every time. You don't install pips, you don't install mkdocs, you don't install the thing, you don't install the extensions, and you don't build every time. You see? So if you use Jekyll as well, you will do the same process, but instead of with pip and Python, you will use Jekyll and Ruby. And it will download from it. These normally are, let's say, robust enough that they work. So the servers normally respond, and this is done every day, every minute, almost every second around the world, because there's a lot of people building content for the internet. But it might fail, and if it fails, you have to come here and have a look. You can access this page through the little green icon that I showed, or you can go to the left, Napa, CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment, and check the same page. Here, actually, we have all the pipelines that we have been triggering since long time ago, and maybe there's one that failed at some point, maybe not. We are so good. But at some point, like I did yesterday, I did with this one for Smart Citizen, and it failed. You see, actually, it failed again earlier. Different interface, but similar, like similar output. And here you have to go and say, exited with 2 warnings and exit. Oh, what happened? And you have to go out with the log and check what happened, etc. So, SSGs. Coming back to Jekyll, you install bundler and Jekyll gems, and you should be able to have this folder structure already with the gem file and the different specifications. This is automatically generated for you. The config file, the same as the mkdocs, and here in the underscore posts is where you have your Markdown files. Okay. If you want to see the local server, the same way as we did with mkdocs, you will use Jekyll serve or bundle exec Jekyll serve. All this is in the documentation. Jekyll serve. You do this same way. Localhost is here. Click on it. This is my website. Okay. Looks different. Jekyll is more designy, let's say. You can customize it a little bit more. And there's tons of templates online. If you just do Jekyll templates, there's even a directory for it. And you can just, all of these are, well, some of these are free, almost all of them. You can just get any of these, clone it, or download it.
For example, yesterday we saw like HTML templates. If you're working with some Markdown, we have to apply a Markdown template let's say, Untitled project or.
Yeah, so HTML templates, normally they don't have any markdown in them. You just write in HTML, pure HTML. These ones are, let's say, what you don't see here on the left, which is the files that are used to do the templating for your Markdown files. Right now you don't see them, but in the ones that you download, of course you see them. This is the default one, so Jekyll understands it. But in the ones that you download, you will see them on the left, and you also can modify them. When I did the File Academy, for instance, 3 years ago, I used Jekyll. I downloaded one, I edited it, and I made my full assignments with it. And if you want to check it or see the process, is this one. These are, for instance, my assignments. This is automatically generated. These are all automatically generated as well. Except, I write the markdown and the rest is all. Okay. For me, it looks a little bit nicer than the Playbox, but it's a matter of, if you say, para uso los colores, means which one is on. So you can pick, or you can just write your HTML from 0, or you can take templates for HTML.
So if you're writing, for example, in MP.dot, then you can use a template and HTML.
Yeah, you can modify the template as well, but MKDocs, the template is called material actually, which is this one. But it doesn't have, let's say, an accessible way of modifying the template itself. You would have to do a little bit of workaround, the same way we do it in the documentation for Smart Citizen, which adds one thing called custom theme. You see here custom theme. You can edit these things, but are very minimal stuff. Normally, MKDocs is more rigid in that sense. Jekyll is less rigid than that. You can modify the template itself very simply. And of course, the HTML template without any static set generator, it's at the end of the template. So you can modify the whole thing.
I would say if we want to have like more flexibility with the aesthetics and the layout and that to work with Jekyll instead of.
If you want more aesthetics, I would either download an HTML template, bootstrap with everything nice, or Jekyll and modify it. I did the second only because I wanted to learn Jekyll. But either one of those two are fine. MKDocs is going to be much different. However, this is an MKDocs site from previous year's student, but doesn't work many things. But I like it a lot. For instance, and this is MKDocs and has different settings, so you customize many things. You download it a different thing, etc. But it's not the same. So Jekyll. So we have here our Jekyll server. Let's say that I wanted to add another post. Actually, this is the default post, let's say. So let me just put this in a circle. This is the default post. If I visit it on the site, here it is. You have very small, so very similar features as you had in empty docs. And the syntax that you're writing is exactly the same. You write in Markdown here, same way, with comments and stuff like that. But there's one difference, and this is part. This is what we call the front matter, which is basically what is the metadata for this Markdown file for Jekyll to render it properly. Line by line, this means that we're going to use a post layout. So it has this look, and it's going to be included in this post list. The title is going to be Welcome to Jekyll. The day in which I created it was here. And this one is a category if you want to filter things and stuff like that. Let me create 2 or 3 more so that this makes sense. Let's say that I'm making a post, what is it? 28. So 28, Jekyll class. And I edit this and say Jekyll class, the date. You don't have to be so specific if you don't want to. And here we're going to put something different. Hello. Okay. So now Jekyll is doing something here. And if I go to my browser, I have the new post here. Automatically, you see the date is generated by itself. The title is included in here. The feed already is updated. And if I go here, hello, my friends, a nice looking date. Whatever. Save. Does it sync? Refresh. There. Okay. Here, Jekyll is more like a blog post type of framework. So it's very well, it suits very well for Academy because each week you have an assignment and you can put the same way as I did in my feed, let's say, different assignments. You can customize the way that it looks, but basically makes like each of the items in a list, and then you're clicking on each of them, and they all look in the same structured way, and the content is the same that you modify. Okay. If you want to edit each of these things, the footer, etc., some of them can be done through here. This is my title. Well, let's put something there. File Academy 2021. And blah, blah, blah. And here I think in Jekyll you have to relaunch the server so that it reads the conflict. But here you have Academy 2021 and the title updated. This is the description that it wrote, automatically generated, and the feed of the post is like same for the about page. If I wanted to change the about, I go here, and you see that here the page layout, the layout for this in the front matter it changed, meaning that this is a page now, not a normal post. The title is about. And it also has what we call a permalink, which is it always going to be in /about of the site. It's not going to be somewhere else. It's always in there. To understand a little bit better, and with this we'll finish. What is this front matter? And this is how basically this thing as Jekyll works. The front matter basically defines where you're going to put the content of your Markup page. That can be an HTML file already, or with some placeholders, or it could be another Markdown page. This is basically how it does the process. So imagine that this is my final, super final page that I want to show. Type HTML with the head, the body, etc. And it has this placeholder here called content, bracket, space, content. Any Jekyll, what it's going to do is look for all the files in your repo that have default as a layout in the front matter, take the content and put it in there. Just that. That content could be Markdown or it could be more HTML. In this case, we're putting HTML that also has a placeholder. So someone has to call page.html as a layout to put content inside. In this case, this page here in the front matter calls page, and it could be many pages as well. It's going to take this orange square here and put it into content there, which this, let's say, overarching one will be put into this one. So you see how this gets completed, let's say. And the final one is the Markdown file that you create, or your HTML if you wanted to, which basically is the content. You put it in here. Then you take this all one, you put it in there. Take the whole thing and you put it in there. So you iterate little by little, and you take the final Markdown into the previous one, into the previous one, into the previous one. And you little by little build the HTML structure in, let's say, a hierarchical way. At the end of the day, you only touch this one, and the rest is part of the template. If you wanted to modify it, you can. You have to just make sure that there's always something called content. And other things, like for instance, this here that says bracket page.title. This is title in the front matter. This metadata is rendered into this little point. And you see that it's very easy to do this programmatically, because you can have a bunch of layouts that hierarchically embed into each other. And at the end of the day, you have one Markdown file with the metadata on the top that gets put into the first one of the layouts, then the second one, then the second one, then the last one. And at the end of the day, you have your HTML. Okay?
If there are several pages, how do you know which one goes first?
There's only one layout in the front matter.
Okay.
One page can only call one layout. One layout can be filled with many pages.
Okay. And here, if you have several pages, how the HTML code is put in order in the main one, or in the paper possible way?
No, sorry. So imagine that this default one, there's only one content in here. But other things would be site, title, etc. Several would call the default, okay, but they would be rendered separately. They won't be, let's say, the same in the same page. Like, imagine that we have several branches hanging from that. That's not possible. Okay, they will be in parallel. Yeah. So that's more or less how it works. To show you an example, I'm going to go to 2018 here. What is this? Go to GitLab and SoundCloud. 2018. Apps. Barcelona. Students. Here. So that's my site. Here, actually, let's download it. Probably have it somewhere, but let's just go. This was built with Jekyll. The Jekyll configuration file, it doesn't use minima. It's another, it's another template. It should be. It's not even found here. Let's see if it's here. Let me see if it's here. Well, no, actually, there's no template because the template is here. Exactly. It's going to take a while because quite heavy. But let's see here, layouts. These are the different stages of the layouting system. Default is the last one, let's say. And you see here the content type. Any file that calls layout or default, sorry, basically it's just going to put HTML basic structure around it, and in the body, inside it, just going to put the content. Here you see that also has head.html, which is another file that contains the head of the HTML here, and has the links to the JavaScript part, CSS, etc., etc. There's also a header and a footer separate that is going to be replicated everywhere. And if we look into layouts, I think it's in page. Layout, let's see default. Here, you see, include header, it always gets included, include footer, everywhere, all the same. This is the default one. And the main div, yes, the main part of the body is what we decide what it is. And we have two different layouts, one for page and one for post. The post is basically the same for every assignment. And this is the structure of it, not super complex. Basically, it has this main class called post. This is a little bit of JavaScript only to scroll up. When you click a button, it scrolls up in a nice way. The rest is in the content here in this line. That's it. And here you have some extra stuff that is a title, the page title in the front matter, and the date with a little bit of formatting saying how to display year, month, and date. That's it. And you see, sorry, I didn't see this, that this, let's say, feeds the default page. So all of this gets put into default. In parallel, you also have a post page here, which also gets put into default. The content is here, and it only has a title and the content itself. And that's it. That is for the layout. How do you make it look nice? Well, with CSS and with something called Sass, which is CSS but with variables, so that you have like a little bit more control of what you write. CSS. All the CSS stuff, the same way that you normally write, not very long. And the other one is SCSS, which is the same, but with some variables inside, which takes care of, for instance, of, I don't know, if I define a variable somewhere else regarding this, for instance, spacing unit, and I define it in the configuration, it puts it in here. Jekyll does that. And it's the same as CSS, but with the possibility of including variables with this $sign and the name of the variable. Okay. And this I define either in my config or on main configuration file for the CSS file. All this, you will get it in the template. You will start customizing it, start exploring it. If you choose to use Jekyll, then Jekyll build or Jekyll serve, and it will make the same as Playbox. Last thing that I want to show you is well, the structure here. Of course, you need to have this index page always, no matter how you do it. If you create an index by yourself, or if you make it with a status generator, there always has to be an index so that you know where to go. This is the convention in the internet. And I recommend also that you put images and files in separate folders in a structured way. Let's say, and I normally did this way with file like names on the beginning, and you always direct them to the image folder. No way, there's no, and that way you won't lose the links or where the images are. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, one question for the pictures. When you build it, then it makes a copy of all your images into another in the public folder.
Yes, exactly. So if this is the one from before, from Diego, I have the docs here, images, all the images here, and in the public, images and all the images.
Okay, so that was just nice. So
yeah. You could.
So that's one good thing to build on your computer and to control after that. Then you don't have this double image thing.
Well, actually, in GitLab, it doesn't really matter because the public folder, it's going to be temporary over there. Actually, it's a little bit worse in terms of size. Yes, but we'll probably, I'm not sure if there's a way to always refer to the images in, let's say, the root folder and avoid that copy. Probably we could look at it and never ask that question. But yes, it is a copy for you. And so that's how Jekyll works, the structure itself. And I don't have much more to tell you. Here in the documentation, it explains the same thing as I did with the different layers and the content a little bit more verbose way. Just for you to know, the curly bracket things is called liquid. It's called liquid syntax, or in some other places you might see this as what is the default way that, for instance, Jinja and many other templating system work, which is curly brackets, either double when there's a variable inside, like this, or for actions, curly that sign, percentage sign, and then the action that you want to do. So this is an action, this is a variable, if you want to use templating itself. And here, finally, the config stuff, there's more things that you can customize, some extras, etc. And at the end here, I also give you some nice tutorials. This guy did a nice Playbox tutorial here, the documentation for Jekyll, and some other frameworks, for instance, called Hugo. It's another one by written in Go. this Google language. Go is another programming language that Google designed, and some more other things. If you don't like any of the ones that I gave you, there's also these other two, DocPath, Mr. Smith, and many others. We don't care which one you use. The only thing is that it has to be in the repo. So you cannot document in a weird WordPress on WordPress server, WordPress.com. You have to edit and put the files in GitLab because we need that reproducibility and archive for file. Okay. Last but not least, at the end you see or what's it called? Luciana will give you 2021 labs works. You see here, I probably they told you already yesterday, but here in the site, you need to put the student agreement. Be careful not to delete this ever on the agreement itself, because it's the way that we use to identify that you are happy to have the content of the website used in the future and the license that you have with. And that's pretty much it. Okay. And with that, we start with agreeing with it. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Do you have any questions? I know there's a lot of information. We're going to take everything out. So, relax. But I'm not probably going to be here in the second part of the morning. So if you have any questions regarding this at the moment, or you can see it tomorrow or during the support time. The extra files that we talk about ignore mkdocs is the configuration file. If ignore is a file that you use kit when you can keep track of the changes to ignore them. This DS4, for instance, is one of the files that OSX Mac takes care of the indexing of the different files on the computer. And basically, a lot of people forget it and send it to people and file. Site and .env, but .env is a convention for people to say like environment variables and sometimes password tokens and things like this. So they were nice already to avoid that to happen in case you created a .env file. And site is if you are using an static generator that makes a folder called _site, it avoids publishing it. If you're going to change the way that you do it, for instance, deploying the site yourself with _public or public or something, make sure that it's not make it ignore. And make sure to make it ignore whatever you want it to be public. For instance, here if you don't want to, if you want to have a lot of files in the repo, but you don't want to send them with videos, things like that, you can write them and intercept projects and things like that. Okay. The rest of the files, GitLab to see like you know already. The README is this. This won't be on the website, but it's basically a description of your site. You can write here whatever you want. And it also know and requirements is for Python. It's the Python requirement file. That basically when you do pip install minus R requirements txt, instead of installing something that you write in line, it takes this file and installs it. So actually, when you clone, you could do pip install that are requirements and takes that file and goes line by line and installs all the packages. And you don't have to do it manually. Okay, the Playbox is already installed on the server. So yeah, but not just so yeah, Any doubts, questions, complaints?
I have some personal, but what to do?
Okay. So let's take a break. That's going to be the final project.
Yeah.
So, comments on
For the break? Yeah. Yeah, we can meet here 12:35 or something like this.
Perfect.